Do you seek the freedom to pursue greater meaning and purpose in your life? Is there something that you're passionate about that you'd like to support by giving time, talent, or money? Do you seek a level of financial freedom to live an ideal life as you uniquely define it? Welcome to the Money and Meaning Show with Jeff Bernier, a show dedicated to helping you gain the confidence and freedom to lead a life of personal significance and help you get your actions and resources in alignment with what matters most.
Hey, hello and welcome to the Money and Meaning Show. So glad you decided to spend a few minutes with me this afternoon. I am so pleased that you're joining us. This show is all about helping you get clarity and confidence to lead a great life. And we do that by getting deep on what matters, having conversations and presentations about things that can help you get clarity on what really matters. But we marry that, or we combine that, with a deep discussion around holistic wealth management. How do we create the financial capacity to go do what we are uniquely called to do? And there are a lot of facets to these conversations, and today is a really important one. There's not a week that goes by in our wealth management practice where we're not having conversations with our clients who are in Act 2 of their lives and trying to make sure that they are in the best living arrangement for their needs and to have a fulfilling life. And there are a lot of aspects to that. Well, I am really pleased today to have an expert on just that topic, as well as many others. So I'm really pleased today to be joined by Ryan Frederick. Ryan is the founder and CEO of Here. Here is a platform to help understand and unlock the power of place to enrich people's lives. It's introducing the discipline of place planning, content, tools, and insights to help everyone be in the right place at every stage of life. Ryan is an internationally recognized thought leader, speaker, author, and entrepreneur, specializing in healthy longevity for nearly 20 years in the field. He's advised organizations internationally, ranging from Fortune 500 companies to global institutional investors and healthcare systems, as well as developers, real estate developers, housing developers, and operators. He's educated tens of thousands of people through keynote talks, workshops, videos, blogs, online assessments, and importantly, his book, Right Place, Right Time, which I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about. Ryan has been cited in a lot of news outlets, CBS News, Washington Post, Forbes, and many others, guest on a lot of podcasts like this one, focusing on healthy longevity and the importance of place. He's on the National Advisory Board of Johns Hopkins University School of Nursing, a past member of the Bipartisan Policy Center Task Force on Health and Aging, and he lives in Austin, Texas with his family. So that was a pretty long introduction, Ryan. I hope I gave you justice here. But anyway, welcome so much for joining me on the Money and Meaning Show today.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. Sorry to put you through that little gauntlet there, but you did well. You did well.
Well, it's not a gauntlet because I think it's really important to sort of set a context when I have a guest on to get some understanding of kind of who you are and what you believe and what your background is, because we're interested. When we're talking to people and when I hear some advice and some counsel, we also want to hear their background and their life experience. And so that's really where I like to start these conversations, if you don't mind. I'd like to just get a little bit personal as well as professional, and just, if you don't mind, just telling me a little bit about yourself and your family, but importantly as well, how you got interested in this study of longevity.
Yeah, Jeff, I'm a strategy guy. It's one of the things that I do in my work and has fueled my firm. But a lot of my story has nothing to do with a strategic plan. It was just paying attention to what you care about and see what doors open and what doors close. I was born on the East Coast in Virginia, really grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area, however, and with the backdrop of Silicon Valley and innovation. Studied electrical engineering in college and worked in Silicon Valley afterwards. But the company I was part of, an early employee of a company that went public, we had a scandal in our sales team. sent about a handful of people to jail. I was in my mid 20s.
Wow.
Pretty formative experience for me around where do I want to put my energies, what impact do I want to have during my life, and who do I want to do it with? And so I went to business school at that point to Stanford, so in the same Bay Area. But I was really curious about the fact that people were living longer. But we weren't at the time, this was about 20 years ago, not as many people were focused on that theme. Plus, like, how can we do it in a more innovative way? So I spent a summer just curious about this. I wrote letters to people in senior housing, not because I was passionate about place at the time, not because I was necessarily passionate about older adults per se, but I wanted to see what was it like for people in that second half of life. And I actually live near where you are in Alpharetta. I worked for a senior living company, and part of what I did for the summer is I want to actually live in a community. And so I did for a month. I was in the northern part of Atlanta. I was in an independent living community. My wife, we were married for a year or so at the time. She wasn't quite as intrigued about living in a city, so she left me unsupervised for a month, and I got a lot of unsolicited brunch invitations and cookies and so on. I was the only person under 75, only male actually, my wing. But that's really part of where it started, Jeff, was recognizing the way that place shapes us. And I get more and more curious about the fact that just because your parents live for a long time doesn't necessarily mean that, that you will. Your genetics only account for at most 10% of your longevity.
Yeah.
So it kind of got me on this curious path, Jeff, which I think over time I've looked at this trend of living longer, the trend of how place shapes us. I've worked with you mentioned earlier in the bio with large companies, advising them in different ways. But with my book a couple years ago, started focusing as well on individuals
Mm.
and how can at the individual level can we be more like thoughtful about some of this. So I'm excited because we are living in this age of longevity, and it's not necessarily a straightforward exercise. Living longer doesn't necessarily mean better, and I think planning is important in all this. So I'm excited to be part of that journey. I'm excited to use some of my gifts to hopefully help people, in their unique trajectories.
Gotcha. So tell me about your education. So you went to undergrad on the East Coast or the West Coast?
Yeah, I went to undergrad at Princeton, studied electrical engineering there, and but it was really more. It's funny. I have my kids. I have three kids. They're all teenagers now. I feel like as your kids get older, your IQ plummets.
Yeah, of course.
Oh, yeah,
Well, to a
yes.
point. Now, when they get to be about 30, you start getting smart again.
Okay, that's encouraging.
Yeah.
Encouraging. Maybe I'm at a low point right now,
Yeah.
but they're like, Dad, what's going? You studied this electrical engineering thing, and now you're doing longevity, and what happened? So I think that for me, a big piece was just I was curious about learning and innovation. That's what I've kind of carried with me. So that's what I studied in the East Coast, and then we lived in the Bay Area for a while, and then actually lived in the Baltimore area for about a decade before moving to Austin about 5 years ago.
Gotcha. And then at Stanford, you got a degree, an advanced
In
degree in
business.
electrical engineering, or you?
Yeah, that was in business. Yeah, an MBA.
Okay, that was an MBA. Okay,
Exactly.
so yeah,
Yeah, so I
you were
exactly.
definitely you're definitely a process guy and a systems guy, and
Yes.
try to help me figure out, the formula to get to a point, kind of thing. And
My mom is a social worker. And so I feel like there's a piece of me where I'm a process guy, I believe in the process, but this is there's a very human side to all of this that
yeah,
matters.
yeah.
And
Well, you said a couple of things too early on about curiosity and being drawn to things. See, I believe, and I've been developing this a little bit more recently as I've been reading some other resources, but I believe that there's a divine element in all of us. So I think God created all of us for a purpose.
yeah,
Whatever God you believe in is not relevant for that today for our for this discussion. But I think that what you're curious in it is a message from a divine power telling you should go there. You should go and dig it up a little bit. So that's cool that you've done that. So let's stay on that theme a minute. So, one of my all-time favorite quotes is from Howard Thurman. He said, "Don't ask what the world needs, ask what makes your heart come alive, and go do that." Because what the world needs is people whose hearts have come alive. And so I'm big on trying to help people figure out what that is, what their why is. So this is a nosy question, but tell me, can you kind of articulate sort of what your big why is, what your purpose is?
Yeah. It's interesting. Mark Twain has a number of famous quotes. One of them was, the two most important days of your life are the day you were born, which I don't have an issue with. And the second one is the day you found out why.
Hmm.
And I have an issue with the second one because, Jeff, in this world where, particularly if you're college educated, have resources, your life expectancy is continuing to grow. And I don't believe people have just one why.
Hmm.
I think that's part of this dimension of living longer, is that, and a challenge is that your why can change. So I
Yeah.
don't think it's just one day, like Mark Twain said. I think there can be multiple days
Yeah.
where that plays out. I think for me, it is there. I do believe, as you do, that we're born with gifts, and part of the exercise is to understand what those are and then cultivate those. And I also believe that key part of purpose is having something you can point to that's bigger than yourself every day.
Hmm.
And for me, this comes at multiple layers. My family is important. Raising my kids is important. But I think that there is such an opportunity for impact, big and small. We'll get into this later, but when I say place, there's layers to that. And I think each of us, we live in communities. And I think there's a role to be, a positive light in our local communities, our local relationships. So that's really important. That's where a fair amount of my time is allocated in energy. And then as it relates to the work that I pursue, I'm grateful because I think that to take these personality tests, Jeff, and a number of them point to the fact that I'm always looking in the future. And I think that this insight around the way like place shapes us,
Hmm.
and the way in which, as we're moving to a digital world, how we can, as a society, can forget how important the physical world is in
Right.
driving our health and well-being. So I feel like there's an insight that I'm on right now, that to ultimately help people just make better decisions.
Yeah.
That is a big part of my why. But yeah, that purpose question is a hard one. I know for a lot of people, especially, and I know you're closer to it, but for people that are in that kind of retirement phase, that can be a fairly perplexing question for
Right.
people.
Right. Yeah.
And can we just talk about finances? I don't want to talk about purpose, but ultimately, in the research I've seen, when it comes to health and well-being, having a clearly articulated purpose is one of the highest correlations to being happy.
Yeah.
Again, with that definition of there's something bigger than yourself you can point
Right.
to.
Yeah. All the happiness literature says that. Agrees with that. But I do like I do like your challenge a bit with the Mark Twain quote, because, I'm two writers and thinkers and thought leaders that I'm really aligned with is um, um, Campbell, talks about the hero's journey.
Yeah.
And he's always talking, or always talked about, finding your bliss. But oftentimes you don't really know what your bliss is until you're out in the world. It's hard to tell an 18 or 20-year-old, just go find your bliss. You gotta, you gotta go find, you gotta go out in the world, and it rises up. your gifts and your values and the things that don't change much are in you. But,
Yeah.
finding your why and your actually how you express it in the world could be a million different ways, perhaps. So I agree with that. So let's talk a little bit about longevity. You mentioned it a couple of times. So tell me what the research says about life expectancy and lifespans today, and what are we learning about what we have ahead of us as we move into this second act?
Well, it's a moving target, I'd say is part of it, Jeff. I think that we, uh, in the research I've seen, I mentioned this earlier, that our genetics only account for at most about 10% of our longevity.
Okay.
So a lot of it is more around like lifestyle and environment. So back to the question, the discussion we just had, do you have purpose? Are you socially connected? Are you physically active? Are you financially well? Going back to your part of your discipline. And then are you in a place for these things to happen for you? There are technology advancements, healthcare advancements, greater awareness of the impact of lifestyle. I have a daughter in college, and I was asking about her sleep recently. She's a freshman, and I remember when I was a freshman in college, like people would talk about how little sleep they get, but she was talking about how much sleep they get. And it's not just her. It's a bit of a difference with like Gen Zs versus some older generations. Like there's more of a cognizance that, hey, these things, there's some habits that matter if I want to live a long, kind of healthy life. So I think we're in a spot now, Jeff, where 50% of the kids born today in the U.S. are expected to live to at least 100.
Wow.
We've got not only this, you have a life expectancy when you're born, but that moves over time. And
Right.
and I think there's some bullish projections that some researchers have. And I saw something recently that the first person to live to 150, they believe is alive today.
Hmm.
You've seen advances in cancer care, the ability to have your DNA sequence so you can have personalized medicine. Of course, what's happening right now with AI and big data. So we're, I guess the good news is we have the prospect of living like longer, more meaningful lives, but with that also comes responsibility.
Yeah. Well, not only responsibility, challenges. I mean, long life expectancy can be a good thing if we have certainly if we have quality of life, but it creates some challenges and complexities as well. Tell me a little bit about that. What complexities or challenges do we have if we all live to 100?
Yeah, there's a ton of them. I mean, I'm curious for Jeff, for your practice, what is there a default age that you do your projections out to at this point?
Yeah, we typically right now we do we expect a married couple moving into Act Two to live into their mid 90s. So 93 and 95 is kind of what we would typically do, and this probably should be updated a bit. But the thinking there is, I think, on the most recent mortality tables, that's about a 20 or 25% chance that that a male will make it to 93 and a female would make it to 95. So it's about a 20 or 25% chance on the current table. But again, based on the research you just described, maybe that's not conservative enough.
Well, that's part of the issue right now, and I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. I did a post, I think it was a week or so ago, and there was some banter around someone saying, if I knew now that I was going to live as long as I might, I would have done things differently with my planning. And I think one of the tricky things about drawing these lines is that it's not just about you and your health; it's about the advances in our society.
Right.
And let's say you're 65 and you're mapping it out, and you say, 93, 95, like you're describing. Well, that's like 30 years of potential advancements. for people. And that may, I don't think anyone knows, Jeff,
Yeah.
but but I do think it's, you're going to see, there may be some surprises in this. And so I have seen, I'm in my late 40s when my wife and I were doing some work with our planning, the default was 100. So I went into it. And so I think there are complexities and challenges. I mean, I think part of it is this, this exercise that we all face, which is how much do we like enjoy and focus on our present self versus looking out for our future self. There's a book done recently. I forget the title at the moment, but it's by a psychologist at UCLA Anderson School, and he
Hal
talks
Hershfield.
about exactly. That's exactly right,
Yeah.
and talks about this idea of when they do these MRI scans for your brain, and they show pictures, and your ability to. So some of the pictures were your current self. Some were modeled after projections of what you might look like in time, like reasonable assumptions. And then others are complete strangers. And your mind reacts to these future pictures of yourself pretty similarly as it does to just a stranger.
Yeah.
And so one of the tensions in this is, how do we manage looking out for our future self versus optimizing for our current self? That's one kind of tension. Another tension is what is which I'm sure you do a lot with your clients, like how do you think about like your current risk profile and how does that like change over time?
Right.
And one of the complexities with living a longer life is as you go through it, people tend to be less risky later in life. And then on top of that, the ability to make dramatic changes just can be harder.
Right.
So I think that and there's there's a lot of complexities here, but one other one I'll layer in here, which is sometimes too, people can be, frugal to a fault, where there's opportunities to invest in their health, certain opportunities, but so frugal that they end up effectively saving too much money, down the road. So there's less living, too much planning. So, and we get to that a little bit later, but there's a number of different elements. And I think increasingly it's harder, I think, for people to expect that they're going to be able to figure out all these things, purely on their own.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I agree. And, there's obviously some structural challenges, in terms of, government benefits and, Medicare and being available and Social Security and, and the cost of living over a 40-year period instead of a 30-year period.
Yeah.
And so, and striking that balance that you just described and enjoying the journey today and living in the present, but also being responsible to your 85-year-old self as well. So it's a complex issue, but holds out a lot of opportunity for people with the right mindset, I think, and in the right, context in terms of where they live, what they're involved in, whether you're continuing to learn and grow versus stagnate. I mean, for the right type of person who's willing to think differently, it can be a very exciting time. I mean, I like something that either they said at the Halftime Institute or they said at Encore, I can't remember which, but something about, you can make the second half the best half, but you just have to think differently about it. So anyway, let's move to what you're really the expert in or an expert in. And that is, as we age well, if our goal is to age well in this second act, what role does place play? Tell me a little bit about where we live and how that impacts aging well.
Yeah, well, I would say the punchline is it's enormously important. There is Dan Buettner. He created Blue Zones, and Blue Zones book came out 20 years ago. Had a Netflix series last year, and looked at places across the world where people live longer, healthier lives, and looked at Japan or a specific spot in Japan and Costa Rica and Greece and so on. Loma Linda of Seventh-day Adventists in Southern California. And what he found in that, and I think he's done a great job of raising the visibility of this, is that you get shaped more by your place than you shape your place.
Hmm.
And so if you want to like change your habits, rather than go through the somewhat painful process of changing habits, in some ways it's better just to go to a place where the habits are already in the water.
Hmm.
And so we can talk about our, eat your broccoli and getting your 10,000 steps in. Those are important. Absolutely. Those are key things. But if we can put ourselves in a place which helps us uh, do the things, nudges us towards a life that we're looking for, that nudges us towards these healthy habits, we have the benefit, going back to those extra years, of this compounding effect
Hmm.
of the positivity related to these habits. And so, just to get a little more specific, we talked about purpose. And if you're in a spot where people have a purpose similar to the one that you're looking to seek, it just rubs off on you.
Yeah.
We are influenced by our social networks. If our friends are obese, we're obese, more likely to be obese. And if the reverse is true, if our friends have purpose they can clearly articulate, we tend to catch those as well. So you got a purpose piece. The social connection one is huge. We're in a world now where there's some benefits, of course, of technology. The fact that we're having this conversation over Zoom and can share these thoughts in a podcast form with people across the world, like that's amazing. At the same time, there's ample research that suggests people are having a harder time connecting and being known.
Hmm.
And so being in a spot where you're known, where you know your neighbor, where you've got a challenge or a way to support someone, and you can reach out to them, they can reach out to you, and
Yeah.
there's social trust in that really matters. And then the physical well-being, just being active. I remember I was part of a healthcare conference a few years ago, and they had the foremost recent U.S. Surgeon Generals, and they said, "What's your one piece of advice?" They all said the same thing in one word: move.
Hmm.
So, are you in a spot where you're, nudged towards just healthier lifestyles related to physical activity and sleep and a number of different things in that domain?
Yeah.
And then the, financial piece was so critical. It's not necessarily how much money you have. It's like, what's the peace of mind you have that you're financially well?
Yeah.
And with place, it tends to be one of, if not the leading expense in our lives. And it also may be the most valuable asset, in our portfolio. So place, it's like in the air, it's in the water, but for whatever reason, we don't talk about it enough, in my view. Because if you get place right, I'll unpack what place is in just a second. When we get place right for the right place in life, it just makes life easier, more enjoyable, but also improves the probability that you'll be healthy longer. Now,
Yeah.
the reverse is true. If you're in a spot where a number of those conditions I mentioned earlier are less likely to happen, well, you're more likely to be unhappy in that moment, and also has these adverse effects for you over time. Now, when I say place, the physical aspects of place
Yeah.
tend to often think about just our four walls. You go into Zillow and you see, the stainless steel, kitchen and granite island and so on. And listen, your four walls matter absolutely for a bunch of different reasons, but it's more than that. It's also what block are you on? What's your neighborhood like? What metropolitan area are you in? Urban, rural, suburban area? What
Hmm.
county? What state? What region of the country? What country? Region of the world? Like, your lived experience is a function of that composite. So you have some situations where people might love their home, their house, their four walls, but find out they don't really know their neighbors anymore. Or it's
Yeah.
not as safe as it once was, or tax policy has changed things. Maybe you're more exposed in for inflationary conditions. So anyway, it's I see it as one of, or it may be the most important decision around that drives our lives. The average American adult moves a dozen times,
Hmm.
but they think about place a lot more than that, of course, a much larger number. And as one thinks about investing in your place, it doesn't mean you have to move. There's plenty of ideas to make your current place better, both physically with enhancements or just how you orient your place. It may be that there's friends you haven't seen for a while that you need to go reach out to, or maybe you've lost a spouse, and how do you reimagine your place to work for you in this new chapter? So there's layers, I'm pretty convicted that place is a really important area to spend some time on.
Yeah, I think maybe it's neglected too in terms of the hierarchy of things to be concerned with. And I had a coach a few years ago, and he would have us, list all our goals, over the next 36 months or whatever. We'd have these whole laundry list of goals. And he said, okay, now let's figure out which of those goals, which 2 or 3 of those goals are what he called drivers.
Yeah.
But if you get this one right, a lot of those other ones will just occur naturally.
Yeah.
And maybe this place decision is like one of those big ones. If you can get that one right, a lot of the other ones will just kind of take care of themselves. And I haven't really thought about it that way very much until you just started talking about the importance of it and being more intentional about it. I think a lot of us do things by default or by societal reasons. Everybody's doing it, or our neighbor did it. My friend on the golf, that I play golf with every week, moved to South Florida, so I should, and what's right for them may not be right for you. I mean, it's, so I think it might be a driver. It might be one of those big decisions, as you've described, that can take care of a lot of other things. One of the things in all the happiness literature and the longevity and wellness as we age, documentation literature talks about social connections and friends. And so tell me about place as it relates to social connections. What role does where you live play in social connections, and how should we think about that?
Yeah, I'll answer that, but I just want to address what you just said, because I want to put an amen or an exclamation mark to what you said, because it's a driver. And I don't think, for whatever reason, I think we overlook it sometimes. Like my family and I, we lived in the mid-Atlantic for about a decade. We moved to Austin, Texas about 5 years ago. Like, I am a different person, I have been shaped by the places that I've lived in, and am being shaped actively today. And so we'll keep it real simple. Like, if we want to, as we tie into your question, if we want to be in part of rich, thick social networks, let's say in person, well, living remotely on a mountain will give us like beautiful views and allow us to be connected to nature, but probably not going to be the best place to be weaved into thick, like daily relationships. So in some cases, it's true, like to the extent we've agency on it, where we live and how we choose to engage where we live is a function of our values. We might say something is important, but if we don't have a place for that to actually happen, how important is it really? Right. To your question about social connections, there's a book came out. It's based on this recently. Forgetting the name of these books here on our podcast, Jeff, but there's a book that was based on the longitudinal 80+ year study out of Harvard.
Right.
And they looked at 2 cohorts, drew them together, but a cohort of people from men, because it's so long ago, from Harvard, and then a similar cohort of men that lived in Boston, a different socioeconomic profile. And over the course of their lives, it was really intense. Like, they followed them, they had annual surveys, they got information from their doctors, they'd go meet them in person or over the phone every 5 years, with more of an exhaustive survey. And they said the most important thing that impacted people's health were their relationships. And it was something like the quality of people's relationships at age 60.
Right.
That was the determining like factor for healthy longevity down the road.
Yeah.
And we're in an interesting spot because, as I said, I believe it's harder to meet people today, and it's harder to have deeper relationships. You have to be really intentional about it. And I like to bicycle a bit, go to different meetings in Austin. It was not too hot, although I recently got an e-bike, and that has helped me in some places. But I'll bike at night sometimes. I'll go by and I'll just see like all the televisions that are on in people's houses. And we used to be at a time where a lot of that energy for older homes, for example, were out in their front porches, on their stoops.
Hmm.
And there are more things now that separate us.
Right.
And so even if you're an introvert, like these things matter. And so I think that decision about place can be quite instrumental in helping form relationships, build them. If you have a close social network where you live, like think twice about picking up shop and moving to Florida for better weather, for example.
Yeah.
Like those things can be harder to recreate. There's someone named Robin Dunbar. He's a anthropologist, sociologist in England. He's something called Dunbar's number. 150 people on average how many you can cognitively be in a relationship with, and certain circles from it. And in some of the research he's pulled together, like chemistry matters and proximity matters, like we're talking about. And a related point is time. So if you're around a place where people, where you have your people, are there, and then you're able to spend time with them, that's a key ingredient to really develop these relationships.
Yeah. So where you're at makes a big difference in nurturing social connections and in the environment to have them. Yeah. In terms of that Harvard study, I don't remember who said this, but I heard someone speak one time, and I think they mentioned that the social connections actually was more impactful than whether you smoked or not.
Yes,
So
true. Yeah.
so social connections, having them or not having them was more impactful in life expectancy than whether you're a
Yeah.
smoker or not, which is just,
It's mind-boggling. Yeah, there was a meta study that was done separate than the Harvard study, but what they did is they looked at it in terms of chronic loneliness. And so there's degrees of complexity in this. There's lack of social connections isn't the same thing as loneliness, but without boring into the nuances right now, people that are chronically lonely, the meta health effect is smoking more than a pack of cigarettes every day, to your point.
wow, incredible. Well, this show is all about encouraging people to find their purpose and obviously build the financial plans to create the freedom to go pursue it. And, as I prepared for our conversation today, I went back and read a few of your blogs, which are terrific, by the way. We'll make sure you cite how we can find those at the end of the show. But in one of them, you wrote, and again, some of this is speaking my language, so this is kind of data mining. It says planning has an essential role. However, endless planning can't provide complete peace of mind. There's a limit to what can be anticipated and accounted for. And life does come with at least one certainty: it will end. Unless one derives pleasure from constant planning, excessive devotion to planning can squeeze out the living part of life. So my question, I guess, is how do we strike a balance? Or do you have any ideas or thoughts about how do we strike a balance between doing the planning that's necessary so that we can get aligned and live in a place that's in alignment with our goals and our dreams and our heart and what we're trying to accomplish, and how do we build the financial plans and the tax strategies and the investment strategies and the income strategies and protect things from perils that could occur. So how do we balance all of that stuff with living in the present and enjoying the day? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I get to live this tension every day. I'm more the planner in my relationship with my wife, and my wife, she adds more of the fun. Remember, we did a personality test when we were I think in premarital counseling, and I was the station wagon, like kind of showed up did its job, and she was the sports car in this particular, we would just go
Yeah.
off for fun. So my wife and I, we have some checks and balances, in our own relationship around some of this. So I think a lot of it is an awareness. There's self-awareness on this, Jeff, around where does your personality fall, and how do you honor where your personality falls, but recognizing where some of your gaps are in this. Because I've run into some people as I've worked with different folks around place planning where oh my goodness, they want to plan all the time. And this one type of profile where they want to plan, they want to take as much risk as they can, but they can't stop thinking about it.
Hmm.
And I would say on a daily basis, like, that's unhealthy, because you're never going to get complete peace of mind through planning. It is about de-risking. It's about planning in advance. There's value, absolutely, but it's important, I think, to recognize the limitations of planning and make space, like, every day, for these things that you value in the here and now. And so I think that's just broadly true. But if you have a personality where you're all about living, it goes back to our conversation earlier, just recognizing that your future self may be unhappy with you.
Right.
And if it's too much on that side of things, like, I really, where there's so much uncertainty in the future, with the fact that people living longer, I can't recommend enough the value of planning. Even if you do it on your own, just, like, really take moments to think about this. But there's a spot for kind of putting it on the shelf and then picking it up so often.
Right.
So I think people can balance. I think, Jeff, that friends can be part of this too, where with your friends you can talk about how you're doing some planning, and they can hold you accountable on the planning side. They also can hold you accountable on the living side too.
Right.
But it has its limitations. It's essential, but it's so important to understand where you tend to lean at individual level. Where's your personality tend to lean on this?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Well, as we get ready to wrap up here, I really want to spend a minute or two on some of the key factors that we should be thinking about. And I know you talked in some of your writing about macro factors and micro factors, if we decided to relocate, I guess. But what are the key factors that we should think about as we're trying to figure out where we're going to live?
Yeah, well, there are a lot, and I talk about
and
it.
I know you have a whole book on this, so this you
Yeah.
won't cover it in a
Sure.
3-minute answer, but give me some good thoughts.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned this earlier. Like, I think that all of us, we're snowflakes, not in the sense that we wither away instantly when it's warm, but more that we just have a unique pattern. And what might be the perfect solution for Jeff might be the worst thing for Ryan. Or even the perfect thing for Jeff at age 35 may be the worst thing for Jeff at age 65. And so I would, as a principle, I would just say, and it bores out, in terms of the title of my book, Right Place, Right Time, that, like, places change and people change.
Hmm.
And with places, you might have the same address, might be part of the same city. We go through this with people in Austin. I'll come back in just a second. But just because your address has stayed the same for decades, or you're in the same city, doesn't mean the place is the same. Mm. In Austin, we moved here 5 years ago. There's been a lot of movement, a lot of change in Austin. So a number of people that I've worked with, or my firm has worked with, they've kind of recognized that it's the same name, but actually our place is different. More noise, or it's more expensive, and we're trying to determine, do we want to recommit to our place? And then on the personal side, you have these needs and preferences, and just recognizing that those shift over time. And if you've got a partner, they shift for your partner too. And so part of what I reveal or advocate is this alignment of place and person and people for each stage of life. And it doesn't naturally happen. And when you don't get it right, that misalignment can impact your health and well-being in the moment, and it can also have impacts down the road. So what are some of those factors? I think we've hit a number of them. Like, do you find purpose where you are? Are you socially connected? Are you physically active? Are you, financially well? On that side for a moment, I do think that an underrated lever that people have where financial security is a concern is people sometimes underestimate, especially over compounded year perspective of taking that home equity that you may have and putting that in investment vehicles and then choosing to rent at a certain stage because you get kind of less of your net worth is trapped in just one place if you own your home. And then from a total cost of ownership perspective, you can find sometimes that, oh my goodness, I'm spending more on my house than I realize compared to other options, including renting. So there's some variables second half of life you need to consider, especially for those that are a little more concerned about their financial well-being. So those are some levers we talked about earlier, but other factors, it's for those in relationship, where's your partner, on this and these different parameters? If you have kids, what kind of expectations do they have around seeing you and wanting to support you in different ways down the road? Your social networks, what are your friends doing? How important is that? What does that look like to you? You've got number of factors, I would say, on understanding your place, because there's an article in The Economist this week I posted about it on LinkedIn where it talks about the complexities of places that shrink, especially in the US. So is the place you're in, as you project down the road, what is it going to look like in the future? That's an important factor because if let's say your home's an important asset for you, it may not just be that the asset could be less valuable over time, also may be less liquid if you're in a spot where there's less matching kind of buyers and sellers. So I half joke, everyone needs to be a bit of a macro economist when they're thinking about their place and kind of where it's headed. So, and then there are micro factors, just to touch on that for a second. There's on the physical side, how important is it for you to be on one-story living over time? How important is it to have universal design, which is really just wider doorways and slip-resistant tiles in the bathroom, things that maybe people in their 60s or so on, maybe should have an eye towards as things play out. In particular, there's a lot of talk about kind of aging in place that people have. It's a strong preference. I am pretty critical of aging in place in the book. Not so both. I hate the name because it suggests it's pretty passive, but even as a strategy, because oftentimes people don't think about all the future scenarios down the road. So I definitely believe in taking steps to having homes be flexible down the road, so you have more options. You're not kind of kicked out of your house before you want to because of design constraints, but to expect that you're going to be your best. That your current place is going to be the best place in all future scenarios, I think often is a bit naive.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's a lot of factors. You're right. There's a book I write about it, but I think there are some that weigh more significantly than others.
Yeah. Well, let's make sure everybody knows where to get your book first. So tell us the name of the book again and where they can find it.
Yeah, so the book's called Right Place, Right Time, The Ultimate Guide to Choosing a Home in the Second Half of Life. And you can find it at most bookstores. It's on Amazon. Just look under the title and then Ryan Frederick and you'll find it there. It's been really awesome to see the impact it's had on people. That's a good place to start. But part of what's happened, Jeff, is I've realized as the books come out that there really is it's created ripples. It's a bigger thing than I think a lot of people necessarily realize. This, as you point out, this driver. Like I think it's a driver for health and well-being. So what I've also done is on the Here website, which
tell
is
us where
to
find that.
Yeah, it's here, HERE.life. Here.life. That's the website. On the website, you'll see an assessment. It's a 2-minute assessment. It's free. Just kind of take it. Gives you some sense of, well, where are you in the right place or not? Or what are some areas that could be opportunities for improvement. So that's a quick way. Also on the website, yeah, there's a newsletter and blog that goes out every other week that really focuses on the intersection of healthy longevity in place, and really intend to be thoughtful content to help people like think a little bit deeper about these issues. Part of what's happened too, Jeff, is we've been this has transformed or grown. So now that there's workshops people can take. In fact, there's a course that's being worked on right now where people can get an actual plan. I've recently done this with a cohort of people, so it's like a right place plan.
Like it.
And so for those that are interested in that, they can sign up to learn more about that on the Here website. And then the last thing I would say, and then on LinkedIn, it's Ryan Frederick on LinkedIn is a good way if you're active on LinkedIn. And last thing I would say, Jeff, is that I've been having some spirited debates. We haven't had a chance to get into this, but I see place being so important that place planning becomes a new discipline. Because heretofore, places, it's been a do-it-yourself exercise. Oh, let me look on Google, or what is my friend Joe doing?
Yeah.
As opposed to, am I really thinking about it intentionally? And I think place planning, it has, with the content and the tools and the frameworks, I think it has a pretty tight relationship with financial planning.
I do too.
It has like a quasi financial piece, but so there's definitely financial pieces, but then there's some non-financial pieces as well as people go through it. So wouldn't be surprised if over time this type of place planning becomes more common for wealth advisors such as yourself to want to lean into, with clients.
Yeah. Well, I think the problem is oftentimes we deal with this challenge reactionary and not proactive. We're not proactive in it.
Yeah.
And so we have to make some decisions because we have a health problem or we lose a spouse, or we can no longer live in the home because, again, we need a better type of home for our age and our capability. And we're reacting. Kids have moved, 2,000 miles away. I want to be close to the kids. So you just move. It's kind of reactionary, not proactive. And, I just tell you, in the wealth management space, today we're all about trying to figure out how we can create more value for our clients.
Yeah.
And I think this has been really fragmented because we've had experts in aging help people find the right, long-term care facility or, assisted living home. I mean, there are resources that we've referred people to do those kinds of things, very reactionary, as I mentioned. But if we're trying to create additional value and help people think about this very important driver, I think you might be right. This might be a part of overall wealth planning that our industry should start embracing and partnering. I mean, partnering with firms like yours and others to help us do it, because obviously we're not really trained experts in some of this subject matter, but at least bringing these resources to bear to our clients, I think would be a great benefit. Well, this has been truly awesome. So here.life, in the book, they can
Right
get
place, right time. Yeah.
Right place, right time on Amazon or all the other major retailers. And of course, we can get more information on your website on that. Well, this has been awesome, Ryan. I really appreciate your joining me today. Any final comments or thoughts you'd like to share as we wrap it up?
Yeah, no, thanks for your time, Jeff. As I mentioned shortly before we started the podcast, like, I'm so grateful for you and others like you in the wealth management field, where you recognize the impact you can have on people's lives. And it's financial for sure, but it's more than that. And so I love the money and meaning framing behind it, and our conversations about purpose. And one thing we did mention earlier, just to leave it on this, is that there's something called the U-shaped happiness curve. And I read about this in one of the blogs, perhaps others have heard about it, where you have a certain level of happiness. It's a global phenomenon. The curve looks a little bit different depending on the country, but in the US, you have a certain level of happiness, and then in your 20s, it starts to creep down a little bit. And then in your late 40s, early 50s, you hit this, on average, this low point of self-reported well-being. But then it picks up in your 50s, 60s, 70s. So in your 70s and beyond, on average, your reported well-being is is the same as or greater than it was in your 20s. So there's something about what does a well-lived life look like, and there's tremendous opportunity in that second half of life. But I do think being intentional and being planning around it, and then not being bound in by some of our traditional ways of thinking for retirement is perhaps part of the formula for that. So it's exciting time. Age of longevity comes with responsibility and challenges, but there's enormous upside, and place playing part of that.
Well, we will end on that positive note. Ryan, thanks again for being here today. This has been terrific, and glad you all joined us today. Hope you found some value, as I did, in our conversation. You can reach out to me if you would like to give me some feedback. You can email me at moneyandmeaning@tandemgrowth.com. Please share the podcast. You can find us on all the streaming services, iTunes, Spotify. You can also find us at tandemgrowth.com. And of course, you can find my book, The Money and Meaning Journey, on all the major online retailers as well. Thanks, and go make it a great day. Take care.
Thank you for listening to the Money and Meaning Show with Jeff Bernier, a show dedicated to help you gain the confidence and freedom to lead a life of personal significance and help you get your actions and resources in alignment with what matters most. We would love to hear from you. If you have any questions for Jeff or comments on the show, feel free to reach out to us at moneyandmeaning@tandemgrowth.com, or you can find us on the web at www.tandemgrowth.com. Jeff Bernier is the President and Chief Investment Officer at Tandem Growth Financial Advisors, LLC, an SEC-registered investment advisor. This show is a production of Tandem Growth Financial Advisors, LLC. All information discussed is general in nature, is provided for informational purposes only, and should not be construed as specific financial, legal, or tax advice. Listeners should consult an attorney or tax professional regarding their specific legal or tax situation. Listeners should not rely on the content of this podcast as the basis for any investment decisions. A professional advisor should be consulted, and/or independent due diligence should be conducted before implementing anything discussed in this show. While information presented is believed to be factual and up to date, Tandem Growth Financial Advisors, LLC, does not guarantee its accuracy, and it should not be regarded as a complete analysis of the subjects discussed. Tandem Growth Financial Advisors, LLC, does not make any representations or warranties as to the accuracy, timeliness, suitability, completeness, or relevance of any information prepared by any unaffiliated third party, such as guests on the podcast, and takes no responsibility for the same.